So I'm recording my homily for the second Sunday of Lent. And I'm going to do a little bit of a review from last week so that I can build to this week, because this week one of the things I want to talk about is consolation. I want to talk about just why we do what we do. Because when we realize what we do as Christians, and why we have a mission, and why Jesus came, and why He has entrusted so much to us, and why there's a cross, and why there's difficulties, when we have a deep sense of all of those things, we can find incredible consolation in that, because we come to the realization that we're never alone in what we do, and it is for a purpose. It's not just some random thing that Jesus wanted us to do just to make life difficult, that there is a real beauty behind it all. And so I think that gives us an incredible consolation. But that's the end. Let's start with the beginning. And so if you remember last week, we talked about some very difficult things and some desolation, some things that are very difficult. And if you remember, I talked about the difference between empathy and apathy. And so empathy is when a person feels something for someone else, especially somebody who's struggling, somebody who's going through difficulties in their life. And so this is the virtue of the Good Samaritan. The Good Samaritan is the foreigner who was walking along the road to Jericho, right? And he encounters this man who's been beaten by robbers and left for dead. And so he immediately feels something for that person. He wants to help him, and so he anoints his wounds with oil and wine, and he puts him up on his animal and takes him to an inn and pays to have him taken care of. And so all of these things are things that he was not required to do. He wanted to do it. He loved that person. As opposed to the first two people who walked by, the priest and the Levite, who felt nothing. They were apathetic, right? So the Good Samaritan was empathetic, and the two before him were apathetic. They felt nothing. In fact, if anything, they crossed on the opposite side of the road. And so their heart was ruled by fear. But because of that fear, their hearts became hardened, and they became apathetic. They didn't care. All right. And the reason I brought that up last week was because sometimes for us as Christians who are called to empathy, to feel for others and to love our neighbor and to love our enemy, is that when we look at people who are apathetic, who don't care, we almost look on their lives with envy because they don't carry the burden. In some ways, people who live lives of apathy, they almost feel free. They can almost enjoy life more, and sometimes they even seem happier than us as Christians because we carry a burden. There is a yoke that is on our shoulders because of our faith. And that yoke of love is something that we can't just take off and put on whenever we want. It's something that's there. That's why in some ways love is a burden, because it's always there during good times and in bad, right? And so you remember last week I talked about Mother Teresa, and I talked about how somebody who's apathetic could look at her life and say, I don't want that. I don't want to go live in the poorest of the poor. I want to dream to live a life of comfort and ease and relaxation. And in the evenings, if I have had a day of hard work, I can go to a fancy restaurant, or I can go slip into the jacuzzi, or, all these things that we set our hearts on, but are not really rooted in empathy. And Mother Teresa, who just poured herself out and had a deep love for God as the motivating force of all of that, lived a life of empathy, but it was a life of a yoke. It was a burden in that. And so the attractiveness on the surface of apathy, to not care, But then the attractiveness on a much deeper level to somebody whose heart is not frozen, whose heart is not hardened, is to see the beauty of the empathy. Okay, the desolation is the fact that in choosing that life, we are always going to be choosing a life that's more difficult. And that is where desolation can be. Especially if we are choosing to bear a burden and other people are not. Then that load can become overwhelming. That cross can just dig into the shoulder as you're carrying it because other people are not carrying their cross. The saying goes, God will never give you a cross or a challenge that's too overwhelming. He'll never give you something that you can't bear. That's true. But our brothers and sisters, on the other hand, they sometimes will give us burdens that are too heavy to carry. And so to remember that, to keep that in mind, to say, okay, if I'm choosing to live a life of empathy, that's what it's going to look like. Okay, now, last week's gospel, you remember the temptations that Jesus faced when he went into the desert? And so he goes into the desert and he confronts Satan, right? Do you remember the second temptation? The second temptation and the third temptation, in my opinion, are temptations to remove the yoke because there's those moments where we feel like it's not worth it. And so Satan takes Jesus up to the top of the temple, right? The top of the house of worship. And he takes him up there and he tells him, throw yourself down, right? Now he's saying this in the context of, and God, if you truly have faith in God, God will save you. God will rescue you, right? But you notice the context of it? He says, throw yourself down. When do we throw ourselves off buildings? When we're despairing, when we want to commit suicide, when we've given up. And so it's like Satan is telling Jesus, just give up. Don't try to carry this burden, right? He's trying to get him to give in to this desolation, that this mission that he's about to undertake, because remember, this is the very beginning of his mission. He's saying, it's not worth it. Your people are not worth it. They're like Adam and Eve. They will abandon you. Don't carry this cross. Go sit on the beach in Cancun, right? Relax. Take it easy. I'll do the work, right? That's what Satan is saying. I'll take care of your people, right? I'll look after them. Yeah, right. But he's trying to get Jesus to give in. Now, Jesus is not going to give in, obviously, right? But you can taste the desolation. You can taste it. And you and I, we've had moments like that where Satan has come in and saying, give up. Give up. It's not worth it. But it is. But it's still that yoke. We have to carry it, right? Okay. And so you have that desolation. Now, in my parishes, we're doing a book study, and if you're interested in doing it, it's a great book, but it's a program. It's not just reading a book, it's a whole program, and it's designed to go through 4 weeks. And so this book is based on the conversion of St. Ignatius of Loyola and the spiritual exercises that he created from his conversion. And the book is called The Whole Life Confession, 4 Weeks of Awakening to Mercy, Healing, and Peace by Father William Watson, who's a Jesuit priest here in the Seattle area. And so if you want to partake in it, it is definitely worth it. So I have to say, I'm getting so much out of it. In the second day of these exercises, Father Bill Watson asks us to read one of the 4 Gospels in its entirety. Now you remember the 4 Gospels, right? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, right? So you remember the 4 Gospels. So you pick one of these Gospels and you read it completely all in one day. Now the idea is that you read it all at one time. I didn't quite make it, but I did read the Gospel all in one day. And so I chose the Gospel of John. Now as I was reading the Gospel of John all in this one day, it is amazing the insights you get when you read an entire gospel all at once. Because so often we read it in parts, we read it in pieces, and we don't put it all together. But it was amazing. And so one of the things that struck me was one of the desolations for Jesus. And so this really comes out in the Gospel of John, because over and over and over, he tells his disciples, the world will hate you. The world's going to hate you. If you follow me, so this is Jesus saying this, if you follow me, the world is going to hate you. And he says this always in the context that the world hates him. The world hates him. And you think to yourself, that is a bummer. That's not good. I mean, if I want to go out in the street and I want to convince people to follow Jesus, the very first thing I do not want to tell them is, oh, and by the way, the world's going to hate you for this, right? It's not a good selling point. Jesus was not a very good salesman, because he tells his disciples, look, if you follow me, the world will hate you. As I was reading that, there was an image that came into my mind. And again, I grew up in Texas, in West Texas, in El Paso. And so in the desert, we have cockroaches. And we have cockroaches that are the size of your average dog, right? They're huge cockroaches. You know, in your backyard, you have a dog house for your dog, and then you have a cockroach house for the cockroach. I mean, cockroaches were just massive. You go walking through the house at night, and if you don't turn on the lights, you got to pay the price, because if you step on a cockroach, it's crunchy and it's just horrible, right? Hey, you want to be a Christian? Be a cockroach. And you're thinking, what? Nobody likes cockroaches. Everybody hates cockroaches. If you live with cockroaches, you would hate cockroaches. We don't really have them in the Pacific Northwest. Do cockroaches serve any purpose? They don't serve any purpose, right? At least mosquitoes serve a purpose, right? They go after the people you don't like. Just kidding. So, but cockroaches, they don't even do that, right? They're just fat little bugs that are on the ground, and they come up through the drain and scare you. They serve no purpose. Can you imagine trying to help somebody want to be a Christian when you realize we to the world are like cockroaches? People don't want us. They don't want us in their life. And maybe it's the burden that we carry. Maybe it's the empathy that we're called to be. Maybe it's the very high expectations. It's the fact that Jesus raises the bar so high on us that people don't want that in their life. They don't want that burden of love. Maybe that's it. But they look at us like we're cockroaches. We are unwanted. Now, the great thing about cockroaches, you can never get rid of them. They've been here since the dinosaurs, right? And so as Christians, we're like cockroaches. They'll never get rid of us. That's a great thing. The desolation, though, to be rejected, and to know that we're going to be rejected and we're going to be hated. Do you remember the last temptation when Jesus was in the desert and he takes him up the high mountain, right? And Satan tempts him, saying, I'm going to give you everything, right? Look around, Jesus. I'm going to give it all to you. Just hand it over to me. Just let me worry about it. Again, just go to Cancun. Just lie on the beach. I'll take care of it all. But I almost wonder if there's something more sinister, more perverted, not like in a sexual sense, but just more twisted about what Satan was doing. And it's like he almost can't resist to take something so beautiful and try to fabricate it in a very dark and sinister and ugly way. In the Gospel of John, the other thing I noticed was that the one thing that gives Jesus constant consolation. I mean, it just warms his heart. You can hear his feeling every time he says it. And it's every time he calls upon his Father. Over 100 times through the Gospel of John does Jesus talk about his heavenly Father, about our Father. Over 100 times. The Gospel of John is only 22 chapters. That means, on average, almost 5 times a chapter, he's talking to us about his Heavenly Father. And in the Gospel of John, what does he say about his Heavenly Father? He says, we are one. We are united. You know, I have to say as a priest, little tangent here, I have to say that one of the hardest things as a priest is if I feel like I'm not on board with other priests, or I'm not on board with my spiritual father, you know, the bishop. If I feel like I'm separated from the bishop, then I feel like I don't have my father. But when I feel united with the bishop, when I feel united with my brother priest, the other fathers, right, the other priests, it's so wonderful. And so you can just taste it throughout the Gospel of John, just of his love for his Heavenly Father. Constantly, I want to give you my Father, because we are one. It's so beautiful. And so Satan can't resist when he's up on that mountaintop to pretend to be Jesus' Father. To act like, I'll be your Father, right? Just worship me. Now, why do you think I'm saying that? Do you remember the gospel for this week? It's the Transfiguration, right? Jesus takes Peter, James, and John, and they go up the mountain, right? They go up another mountain. But there you have Jesus' Heavenly Father, his real Father, who loves him dearly, and appears to him. And Jesus is glorified. Jesus is transfigured. His face shines. His clothing is brilliantly white. You have this image of the magnificence of the Trinity, but this love of Father and Son. That's what Satan was trying to imitate. But he turns it into something ugly and twisted. And so today we have the consolation. We have the reality of this love. Not the image, not the superficial, not the fake love that Satan tries to offer, the watered down love. No, it's fullness in the Transfiguration. Now, in that moment, Peter, James, and John, they fall to the ground, right? You've seen that in the paintings depicting it. They fall to the ground and they're afraid. And it's so beautiful, but they're still afraid. And you can almost imagine seeing in themselves their own sinfulness and being afraid. And so Jesus is saying, no. I am bringing the Father, and the Father is sending me into your life. Now I'm talking to you, right? Into your life. And he doesn't care how bad things you've done. He wishes to still come into your life. And he'll take care of the darkness. He'll take care of the perversions and those things that have entered into our lives. He'll deal with that. And he'll destroy that stuff. And he'll give us and replace it with his love, real empathy. And he'll give us consolation to carry the yoke, to carry the burden. In the book that I just referred to in our book study, on page 19, there's a couple pages here of phrases that Father Bill Watson uses. And I have to say, they're so consoling. They're so beautiful. I want to read a couple of them for you and just have you meditate on them. Because Jesus Christ wants to console us in our in our desire to live the mission as a disciple. My life's greatest tragedies can be transformed into my life's greatest blessings. That's consoling. The pathway to God's peace and healing runs through my heart's brokenness, sin, fear, anger, and grief. God resolves all my problems with time and patience. God will give me insights, not because I'm better than others, but because I'm loved. I love that one. Fear comes from the enemy. The enemy here that St. Ignatius would often refer to is Satan. And so fear comes from Satan. Be not afraid. Be not afraid. Be not afraid. Heavenly Father, we ask that you help us to encounter your Son. We give you thanks for the beauty of the truth that comes through him. We ask that you give us continually and always the grace to be courageous, to carry the yoke of the cross, and to be very consoled that we are never alone, that you are always with us. You and your Son are always with us, and desire to fulfill our heart's greatest desire, to be full of love, and then to share that with our brothers and sisters. All right. God bless.